A white van idles outside the courthouse annex. No lights, no rush, just exhaust fading into January air. Inside, the lobby keeps moving. Clipboards, key rings, low voices, routine. A side corridor sits too quiet. A keypad door. A laminated label. Property holding. Officer_EC, calm, focused male officer. Early 30s, medium athletic build, defined jawline, short textured dark hair, light stubble, slightly tired eyes, natural skin texture with pores, tactical police uniform with subtle wear marks, grounded realistic expression, walks past the metal detector without looking around. Past the last foot traffic. The building sound drops away. Another sign. Animal holding. Caution. Behind the door, no barking. Only stillness. And a leash clip that shouldn't be there yet. The van outside didn't look like a threat. That was the problem. It sat in the courthouse annex lot with its engine idling like any other government vehicle. White paint, municipal seal, steel cage in the back. No sirens, no urgency. Just a slow exhaust breath that drifted into January air and vanished. Inside the building, people moved with the practiced rhythm of a place built on forms. Clipboards tucked under elbows, keys clipped to belts, conversations in low voices that sounded like they were afraid of echo. Officer Ethan Cole could read rooms the way other men read road signs. This one said, "Don't ask." He stepped through the glass doors and let them close behind him with a soft hydraulic sigh. Fluorescent lights turned everything the color of paperwork. The lobby smelled of old coffee, disinfectant, damp wool from coats that had walked in from the cold. At the security desk, Deputy Lucas Reed looked up and grinned like the world wasn't heavy. "Hey," Lucas said. "You're late by like 3 minutes." Ethan checked his watch. 2. Lucas leaned closer, lowering his voice as if secrets lived in the ceiling tiles. "You ready for this?" Ethan kept his expression neutral. "Ready for what?" Lucas's grin slipped into something tighter. "For the dog." Ethan followed Lucas's eyes past the metal detector, down the side corridor that didn't have public-facing signage. There was a door with a keypad. Above it, a laminated label read, "Property holding authorized personnel only." The word property sat wrong in Ethan's mouth, even when he didn't say it. He walked toward the door anyway. Captain Maria Hayes waited by the keypad. She stood with her arms crossed, shoulders squared, posture that had learned how to hold authority without raising its voice. Her hair was pulled back. Her gaze was calm, not cold, controlled. "Cole," she said. "Captain." She studied him for a beat that felt like it was measuring something that couldn't be written down. Then she nodded toward the holding door. "Transport is here," she said. "We're on a schedule." Ethan's eyes flicked briefly toward the lobby windows. The van. Hayes continued like she'd already decided how this day should go and was giving him the courtesy of hearing it. "This is a transfer, not a discussion. We sign, we load, we move. That's it." Lucas coughed like he was trying to disguise nerves as humor. "Simple day, Ethan. Just don't lose any fingers." Ethan didn't look at Lucas. His attention stayed on Hayes. "Why am I here?" "Because you're steady," Hayes said. "Because I need steady today." Ethan waited. Hayes didn't volunteer more. Lucas did. "Shadow," Lucas whispered, like the name would bite if he said it too loud. "The unsafe one." Ethan had seen the file header this morning, flashed on his phone like a headline. K9. Shadow retired, non-releasable, transfer ordered, non-releasable. That phrase meant there was no civilian adoption, no placement, no slow rehabilitation plan. It meant the system had given up. Ethan had worked patrol long enough to know what happened when the system gave up. He stepped in closer to Hayes. "What facility?" Hayes's jaw tightened. "Not defensive. Disciplined." "You know I can't discuss that." "That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting." Lucas shifted his weight. "Look, I've heard things." Hayes shot him a glance that could have stopped a conversation mid-sentence, but Lucas kept going anyway, softer now. "They moved them out to state, away from the public. It's, so nobody has to see what happens." Ethan's throat went dry. Hayes keyed in the code, the door buzzed, and she pushed it open. Cold air from deeper inside hit Ethan's face like a breath from a basement. "Let's do this," Hayes said. They stepped through. The corridor beyond the door was narrower, the fluorescent lights harsher. The building noise faded behind them until all Ethan could hear was his own footfall and the low hum of a ventilation fan. There were rooms on either side, doors with small windows. Some held boxes and evidence bags. One held a bicycle that looked like it had been here long enough to become forgotten. At the end was another door, this one thicker. A sign bolted into the frame read, "Animal Holding Caution." Lucas swallowed. "Yeah, that's him." Hayes's voice stayed level. "No sudden movements, no loud voices. Keep your hands away from the bars." Ethan stopped just short of the door. "Did he bite someone?" Lucas nodded quickly. "Handler, couple months back. They say he snapped." "They," Ethan repeated, flat. Hayes met his eyes. He failed evaluation. Multiple. The decision wasn't made lightly. Ethan didn't challenge her, not yet. He had a habit. See first, judge second. Hayes opened the door. The holding room smelled like metal and antiseptic and something deeper, old animal fear, the kind that never fully leaves a place once it's moved in. Cages lined the walls, though only one was occupied. Shadow was in the far corner. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't barking. He wasn't lunging like Ethan had expected from a file labeled Unsafe. Instead, he sat with his body curled inward, head lowered, spine rigid like a locked door. A large German shepherd, black and tan coat dulled, as if the color had been drained by time. One ear sat slightly wrong, an old injury. A thick scar crossed his shoulder and vanished beneath fur that didn't lay quite right. But it was the stillness that made Ethan's chest tighten. A dangerous dog tends to move. Shadow looked like he had chosen not to exist. Lucas whispered, "See? Creepy, right?" Ethan ignored that, too. Hayes stepped forward carefully, keeping distance. "Shadow," she said, voice firm. "Stand." No response. Lucas tried, tone brighter like he was talking to a neighbor's pet. "Hey, bud, come on, stand up for us." Shadow didn't lift his head. His breathing was shallow, controlled, not panic, not aggression. Ethan watched the dog's ears. They were not pinned back in fear. They were angled, listening, tuned to the room like antennae. "He hears you," Ethan said quietly. Hayes glanced at him. "He hears. He doesn't comply." Ethan took one step closer. Hayes immediately held out an arm. "Cole." Ethan stopped, but his eyes stayed on Shadow. "What happens when he stands?" Hayes didn't answer, but Ethan felt it, the unspoken line in the air, the belief that movement equals risk, that the moment Shadow engages with the world, he might choose violence. Ethan's gaze flicked to the kennel latch. Double locked. Heavy. He turned his head slightly, listening. The building's ventilation fan hummed overhead. Somewhere a radiator clicked. A distant door closed. And then a small sound, so small Ethan almost missed it. A ring of keys on Lucas's belt shifted and tapped against the metal clip. Tink. Shadow flinched, not a startle like a frightened dog, a precise reaction, head tilting a fraction, ears sharpening, eyes opening just enough to lock on something. Ethan's pulse lifted. Shadow's gaze wasn't on Lucas, it was on the keys. Ethan took a breath. Lucas blinked. "Yeah? Don't move your belt." Lucas looked down like he could control gravity. Okay." Shadow's eyes stayed on the keys like they were a ghost. Hayes frowned. "That's new." Ethan stepped to the side slowly, testing angles. Shadow's gaze tracked the keys, then flicked to Ethan, then back. Not random. Pattern. Ethan looked at Hayes. "What's his history?" Hayes's eyes hardened slightly. "Not for debate." "Not debate," Ethan said. "Context." Hayes exhaled, a controlled release. "He was partnered. Officer died. Dog was injured. Afterward, he became unstable." Lucas added, "They say he won't let anyone touch him. Won't work. Won't even look at a trainer." Shadow looked at Ethan, directly, for the first time, not with challenge, with exhaustion. Ethan felt something in his throat tighten, like the memory of old nights when he'd pulled bodies from wreckage and tried not to carry them home. He kept his voice low. "Shadow," Ethan said. The dog's ears shifted again. Ethan didn't order, didn't demand. He simply let the name sit in the air as an offering. Shadow's head lifted an inch. Hayes went very still. Lucas's mouth dropped open slightly. Ethan continued. "That sound. The keys. It means something." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "You're saying he's triggered." "I'm saying he recognizes," Ethan replied. Hayes stepped closer to Ethan, voice sharp in a whisper. "Cole, this isn't your crusade. We have a transfer order." Ethan didn't look away from Shadow. "You've been calling him unsafe, but he's not acting unsafe." Hayes's jaw clenched. "You want to see unsafe? Get closer." Ethan nodded once. "Then let's be smart about it." He turned slightly, careful not to square his shoulders like a challenge. He lowered his hands at his sides, open. He kept his stance angled, non-threatening. He took one more step. Shadow's muscles tightened, not to lunge, to brace. His eyes flicked past Ethan, toward the door, as if he expected something bad to enter any second. Ethan froze where he was. "Okay," he murmured, "I see you." Shadow's breathing changed, still quiet, but heavier, like he was carrying a weight. Ethan's mind mapped the room. The dog's attention went to keys, to door, to sound cues. This wasn't a dog scanning for a target. It was a dog scanning for a repetition of a memory. Hayes spoke, clipped. "That's enough. We do not have time for this. We load him in 10. Ethan finally turned to her. "Captain, who did his evaluation?" Hayes's eyes flashed. "Multiple trainers." "Names?" "Cole." Ethan felt Lucas tense behind him, ready for the Ethan's about to get himself suspended show. Ethan kept his tone respectful, but firm. "If I'm signing off on this transfer, I need to know what I'm signing." Hayes stared at him for a long second. In that look, Ethan saw the tension she was carrying, pressure from above, deadlines, liability, and something else. Reluctance. Not about the paperwork, about what the paperwork was doing. Hayes finally said, "Dr. Moore is reviewing the file. She'll be here." As if summoned by the mention, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, measured, unhurried. Dr. Lena Moore appeared in the doorway with a thin folder in her hand and a tablet under her arm. She didn't look like she belonged in a place of cages. She looked like a person who belonged in a lab at midnight, surrounded by glowing screens and questions that wouldn't let her sleep. Her gaze moved immediately to Shadow, not with fear, but with focus. "Captain," Lena said. "Officer Cole, deputy." Lucas nodded too quickly. "Hi?" Lena stepped closer, stopping a safe distance from the cage. "This is him." Shadow's ears shifted toward her voice. Ethan watched Lena's hands. She held them close, controlled. She wasn't a stranger to nervous systems, animal or human. Lena's eyes met Ethan's. "You're the escort." "Apparently," Ethan said. Lena glanced at Hayes. "Before he's moved, we should talk." Hayes's voice stayed firm. "We are moving him." Lena didn't flinch. "Then you should at least move him with full knowledge." Hayes gave a small, tight nod. "Go ahead." Lena opened the folder. "The file is inconsistent." Lucas blinked. "Inconsistent how?" Lena's eyes flicked over the paperwork like she could see through it. "There are missing timestamps in the incident report. The initial evaluation notes are summarized, no raw observation logs. The behavioral assessment was performed by contractors, not unit handlers, and the transfer order is signed off unusually fast." Hayes's face tightened. "Are you implying misconduct?" Lena's voice stayed quiet. "I'm implying haste and fear." Ethan looked back at Shadow. The dog had shifted his weight slightly, still hunched, still guarded. But his eyes moved now, tracking each voice. He was present, just trapped. Ethan asked Lena, "What's the incident?" Lena hesitated, then spoke. "A handler attempted a standard touch tolerance test. Shadow reacted, bite to forearm. Not a full clamp, but enough to draw blood. After that, they labeled him unpredictable." Lucas grimaced. "See? That's... yeah." Ethan didn't argue. He asked, "What was the handler doing when the bite happened?" Lena flipped a page. "That's the problem. It isn't described." Hayes's tone sharpened. "It doesn't matter. A bite is a bite." Ethan's eyes stayed on the scar across Shadow's shoulder. "It matters why." Hayes stepped closer, her authority pressing into the room. "Cole, I'm not risking another injury. This dog is being removed." Shadow's head lowered again at Hayes's voice, not in submission, but like the sound itself carried an old association. Ethan noticed. He remembered the key sound reaction. The door scanning. He looked at Lena. "Anything else?" Lena hesitated again, then said, "There's a sealed attachment. It's been flagged, but not opened." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Sealed by whom?" Lena swallowed. "Internal affairs." Lucas let out a small involuntary sound. What?" Hayes's face went still. "That attachment is unrelated." Lena didn't raise her voice. "It's attached to the same case number that appears on Shadow's retirement file." Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. Same case number. Fallen officer. Shadow. Transfer order. A system moving fast. A dog labeled Unsafe. A sealed attachment no one opened. Ethan looked at Hayes. "Captain." Hayes' eyes held his. "No," Ethan spoke anyway. "If IA sealed it, it's because it matters." Hayes' voice dropped low. "If you open that in the wrong way, you make it bigger than this room." Lena said quietly, "Maybe it's already bigger." Outside, the van's engine continued to idle, unseen, but felt like a clock. Ethan looked at Shadow again. The dog's eyes were on him, not pleading, not threatening, waiting. Ethan had escorted violent suspects. He'd transported evidence that could ruin careers. He'd stood between people who wanted blood and people who wanted justice. He knew the moment when doing your job the safe way and doing your job the right way split apart. This was that moment. He turned to Hayes. "Give me 10 minutes." Hayes shook her head immediately. "We don't have 10. Ethan's voice stayed controlled. "Then give me 5. Hayes' jaw flexed. "Cole." Lena stepped in, soft but firm. "Captain, if he's truly unsafe, 5 minutes won't make him safer. If he's misclassified, 5 minutes might stop us from making a permanent mistake." Hayes' eyes flicked to Lena, then to Ethan, then briefly to Shadow. Something in her expression shifted, micro, almost imperceptible. The look of a leader weighing risk against conscience. Finally, Hayes said, 5. Lucas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since he walked in. "Okay, cool, great. 5 minutes, totally normal." Hayes pointed a finger at Ethan. "No hero moves. No opening that cage. No improvising." Ethan nodded. "Understood." Lena stepped beside Ethan, lowering her voice. "If you want to see the sealed attachment, I can request access through proper channels, but it won't be fast." Ethan asked, "Can you open it now?" Lena hesitated. "Not officially." Ethan held her gaze. "Can you open it?" Lena's eyes flicked toward Hayes, then back. "Yes." Ethan nodded once. "Do it." Lena pulled the tablet closer, fingers moving quickly, like she'd done this dance before, between what's allowed and what's necessary. Lucas hovered uselessly, eyes bouncing between screens and dog. Shadow watched Lena's hands. His ears sharpened. Ethan noticed the dog's attention again, patterned, keyed into specific cues. Ethan leaned slightly toward Shadow, speaking low. "Stay with me." Shadow didn't move, but his eyes didn't close. Lena's face tightened as she read, then paled. "Ethan," she whispered. Hayes stepped closer. "What is it?" Lena swallowed. "The attachment describes evidence mishandling in the fallen officer's last case. The report notes an alert anomaly from a K9 Shadow that was dismissed. Then there's a mention of an argument in the evidence room. After that, the timeline breaks." Lucas whispered, "What does that mean?" Lena's voice shook slightly. "It means Shadow might have been trying to indicate something no one wanted to hear." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "This is not admissible. This is not—" Ethan held up a hand, not to silence her, but to steady the room. "Captain, what's the transfer deadline?" Hayes stared at him. "Now." Ethan looked at Shadow. The dog's eyes were on the door again, then the keys, then Ethan, as if expecting the same sequence that had ended in disaster. Ethan realized something, clear as ice. Shadow wasn't afraid of people. Shadow was afraid of the procedure that followed certain cues, like the sound of keys, like a door opening, like a command, like being moved without understanding why. Ethan took a breath, slow. He turned to Hayes. "If we transfer him, and this file is reopened later." Hayes didn't answer. Ethan continued. "We'll have moved a living witness out of reach." Lucas blinked hard. "Living witness?" Lena nodded faintly. "Dogs don't testify, but they remember patterns. Alerts, triggers, their bodies hold details." Hayes' voice went hard. "Are you telling me this dog is evidence?" Ethan met her stare. "I'm telling you he's truth, whether we like it or not." The room went quiet except for Shadow's breathing. Hayes' gaze dropped to the scar on Shadow's shoulder, then rose again to Ethan. "If I halt this transfer," she said slowly, "I'm taking heat." Ethan didn't flinch. "I know." Hayes' eyes sharpened. "If I halt it, I need justification that holds up." Ethan nodded. "Then let's get it." Hayes' mouth tightened. "How?" Ethan turned to Shadow, then back to Hayes. A controlled demonstration, right now, documented, with Lena observing. Lucas blurted, "Oh, absolutely not. No, that sounds like Ethan gets mauled." Ethan didn't look at Lucas. Shadow responds to cues. He's not random. Hayes's voice was low. "Cole, if he bites—" Ethan cut in, calm. "Then I'm responsible." That landed heavy. Hayes held his gaze for a long beat. Then she looked at Lena. "Can you document it?" Lena nodded. "Yes." Hayes looked at Lucas. "Stand by with medical kit, and for once in your life, Reed, be quiet." Lucas put a hand over his mouth dramatically. "Mm-hmm." Hayes's eyes returned to Ethan. "You have one chance. One." Ethan nodded. He stepped closer to the cage, slow enough that Shadow could track every movement. He kept his hands visible, his posture angled. Shadow's muscles tightened again, but his eyes didn't go wild. They stayed fixed on Ethan's face. Ethan spoke softly. "Shadow, look at me." Shadow's head lifted an inch. Ethan felt the room hold its breath. He reached, not toward the dog, but toward the latch on the outer barrier of the kennel area, a safety gate that allowed controlled access without opening the full door. Hayes tensed. Ethan paused, looked at Shadow, then stopped his hand short of the metal. He let Shadow choose whether to engage. Shadow's ears twitched. His nostrils flared. Ethan waited. Seconds passed like long rope. Then Shadow inched forward just enough to bring his muzzle closer to the bars, not lunging, approaching. Ethan kept his voice steady. "Good." Lucas made a tiny squeak in his throat and swallowed it. Ethan glanced at Lena. "Record." Lena's camera light turned on. Ethan kept his hand low, palm open, inches from the bars, not invading, not demanding. Shadow's eyes flicked to the hand, then back to Ethan. Ethan spoke again, softer. "You don't have to fight." Shadow's breathing changed, heavier, like the words hit something inside him. Ethan's mind worked fast. The sealed attachment mentioned an alert anomaly dismissed, evidence room argument. The sound cue, keys. He looked at Lucas's belt. "Lucas, take your keys off, set them on the floor, slowly." Lucas's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because he's reacting to them," Ethan said. Hayes snapped, "Reed, do it." Lucas unclipped the keys with trembling fingers and lowered them to the tile. They made a soft metal kiss as they landed. Shadow flinched, but he didn't lunge. He oriented, sharp, precise nose toward the keys, eyes on Ethan as if asking permission. Ethan's heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. "That's it," he whispered. "Show us." Shadow's paw lifted slightly, then set down again. He stared at the keys, then at the door. Then, slowly, his head dipped and he gave a low, restrained sound. Not a growl, not a bark. A warning. A memory. Lena whispered, "He's signaling." Hayes's face went still. "Or he's about to—" Ethan lifted his hand gently. "Shadow, easy." Shadow's head turned slightly and he pressed his muzzle against the bars, against the exact spot where Ethan's palm hovered. A touch, gentle, deliberate. Lucas's eyes went wide like saucers. He's not—" Ethan's voice stayed low. "He's choosing." Hayes stared like her brain was recalibrating. Ethan held still, letting the moment settle. "Captain," he said softly, "this dog isn't unpredictable." Then, from the hallway, a loud metallic clang echoed, someone dropping a file cart. Shadow's entire body snapped rigid. His eyes flashed to the door. His breathing spiked. Lucas instinctively stepped back. Hayes tensed. Ethan did the opposite. He leaned in slightly, voice steady as a hand on a shoulder. "Shadow, with me." Shadow trembled, but he didn't explode. Ethan kept his palm near the bars, not touching, just present. "Stay." Shadow's eyes flicked to Ethan's face again. His breathing slowed by degrees. That, more than anything, made Ethan's stomach knot, because it meant Shadow didn't just trust a person. He trusted steady leadership, something he'd lost. Hayes's voice was tight. "Cole." Ethan didn't look away from Shadow. This is exactly what trauma looks like. Trigger, orientation, fear, but not aggression. Hayes swallowed. "We still have a transfer order." Ethan nodded, then halted. Under behavioral reassessment, documented evidence of misclassification. Lena nodded quickly. "I can write that." Hayes stared at the dog, then at Ethan, then at Lena. Then she made a decision, the kind that changes careers. "Stop the transfer," Hayes said. Lucas blinked. "Wait, really?" Hayes turned toward the door, voice sharp. I said stop the transfer. Get that van out of here. Lucas bolted like he'd been released from a cage himself. Hayes looked back at Ethan. Cole, if this blows up... Ethan finally turned to her. Then it blows up on me too. Hayes held his gaze, then quieter. Good. Lena exhaled in relief. Shadow sat back down slowly, as if the air itself had shifted from threat to possibility. Ethan stayed by the cage for a moment longer, his palm still hovering near the bars. Shadow looked at him once, and for the first time Ethan saw it clearly in the dog's eyes. Not danger, a question. Are you leaving too? Ethan swallowed and spoke softly, almost to himself. No, he said, not today. The van was still there when Ethan stepped out of the holding room, an ugly reminder that decisions didn't become real until the wheels turned. Through the lobby windows, its white flank caught the winter light like a blank sheet waiting for a signature. Captain Maria Hayes walked ahead of him with the posture of someone who didn't want the building to sense doubt. She didn't speak until they were back in the corridor outside the holding door, where the air felt less like a kennel and more like bureaucracy. You understand what you just did, she said. Ethan didn't pretend. I asked you to halt a transfer. You asked me to put my name on a hold without a formal board review. I asked you to stop something irreversible until we knew what we were doing. Hayes's eyes flicked to Dr. Lena Moore, who was already typing notes into her tablet, face tight with focus. This reassessment better be airtight, Hayes said. Lena's voice was quiet but firm. It will be as airtight as the file allows. Hayes made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. That's what I'm afraid of. Deputy Lucas Reed came sprinting down the corridor like a man escaping a burning building, cheeks flushed. He slowed when he reached them, trying to look professional and failing. Okay, he panted. Van driver is very unhappy. I told him. Hayes cut him off. You told him nothing beyond hold pending command review. Lucas blinked. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I said. He paused, then added, he asked if it was about the dog being, and I said, Hayes gave him a look that made him stop breathing. I said, nothing, Lucas finished quickly. Hayes nodded once, as if approving a toddler who didn't swallow a coin. Then she turned back to Ethan. Cole, she said, voice lower. I'm giving you room, but I need a plan, not instinct, not vibes. Ethan's gaze stayed down the corridor toward the holding room door. Shadow is reacting to specific cues, he said. Keys, metal sounds, doors, it's not random. Lena nodded. Classic conditioned association, she said. But the sealed attachment complicates it. If his response is tied to something mishandled in the case, this isn't just behavioral. It's procedural. Hayes's jaw tightened again. Internal Affairs didn't seal attachments for sport. And they didn't attach it to a dog's retirement file for nothing, Ethan said. Lucas raised a cautious hand like he was in class. Can I ask something very dumb? Hayes didn't look at him. You can ask something dumb without announcing it. Lucas swallowed. If IA sealed it, are we allowed to even look at it? Lena met his eyes. Officially, that's a longer conversation. Ethan said, We already looked. Lucas's eyebrows shot up. He glanced at Hayes as if expecting her to explode. Hayes didn't explode. She simply stared at Ethan, then at Lena, then back. How much? Hayes asked. Lena's shoulders tightened. Enough to know the report isn't complete, not enough to know why. Hayes exhaled slowly, like she was letting pressure out of a valve before it burst. Then we do this the right way, starting now. Ethan blinked. Right way? Hayes pulled her phone from her pocket. I'm calling the division liaison. If we're reopening anything connected to that case number, I'm not letting you two stand in front of it alone. Lucas muttered, Oh, good. More adults. Hayes ignored him and stepped aside, speaking into the phone in a low voice that carried authority even when it was gentle. Ethan watched her posture while she listened, the small tension at the base of her throat that said this conversation was not welcome on the other end. When she finished, she pocketed the phone and looked at Ethan again. They're sending a representative, she said, and they want the dog off the books until they decide what off the books means. Lena frowned. That sounds like removal by another name. Hayes didn't deny it. That's why we're moving first. Ethan felt something cold settle in his gut. Where? Hayes's eyes held his. Our unit's training base, secure, under my authorization. Lena blinked. You're relocating Shadow? Hayes nodded. If he stays in this annex holding room, the system can move him without your knowledge. If he's on my floor, they have to go through me. Lucas let out a breath. Captain Hayes just did a thing. Hayes gave him a look. Don't narrate my decisions like a podcast. Lucas pressed his lips together, but his eyes said he was impressed. Hayes turned to Ethan. You said he responds to steady leadership. Ethan nodded once. He does. Hayes's tone sharpened slightly. Then you're the steady leadership. Ethan's throat tightened. Captain Cole, Hayes said, cutting through, if your instincts are wrong, you'll wear it. If your instincts are right, you'll have saved a K-9 from being discarded and maybe cracked open a case nobody wanted cracked. Lena's voice was softer. It's not just instinct, it's evidence. Hayes nodded once. Then let's treat it like evidence. She looked at Lucas. Get a muzzle. Lucas's face scrunched. He didn't need a muzzle. He didn't bite you, Hayes said. Get a muzzle. Lucas raised both hands in surrender and hurried off. Hayes looked at Ethan again. You're going to leash him. Carefully. No hero moves. Ethan nodded. Understood. Lena stepped closer. We should minimize triggers, she said quickly. No jingling keys, no metal clanks. Quiet path through the service corridor. Hayes nodded. Agreed. Ethan's attention drifted back to the holding door. He could feel Shadow in there, like a presence in the back of his mind. A dog wasn't a person, but grief didn't ask permission before it filled a room. Let's go, Hayes said. They returned to the holding room. Shadow was in the same position Ethan had left him, curled inward, head lowered, body still. But his ears moved as soon as the door opened, tracking the sound, reading the world through it. Ethan stepped in first this time, slow, hands visible. Shadow, he said quietly. Shadow's head lifted a fraction. Ethan felt the familiar pull, the sense that this dog was right at the edge of something, trust, fear, memory, ready to be pushed in either direction by the next move. Hayes stayed near the door with Lena, both maintaining distance, giving Ethan room like a stage. Ethan knelt several feet from the cage, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. He lowered his voice, let the room soften around it. Hey, he murmured, we're moving you, okay? Not out, not away. Just different room. Shadow's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Ethan. Ethan glanced at the scar on Shadow's shoulder. He could imagine shrapnel, fire, noise, confusion. He could imagine a leash suddenly jerking, commands shouted, the smell of blood, the loss. And then blame. Paperwork, labels, unfit, unpredictable. Ethan didn't want to be another hand on the leash that yanked Shadow back into that moment. He stood slowly and stepped to the cage door latch. Shadow stiffened. Ethan paused. He waited until Shadow's breathing eased by half a beat. Then he spoke again. You get to choose calm. Shadow's ears shifted. Ethan opened the small access panel first, not the full cage door. He slid his hand in just enough to let Shadow smell him. He didn't reach for fur, didn't touch, just offered presence. Shadow leaned forward, muzzle near Ethan's hand. A long breath, warm, shaky. Ethan kept still. Behind him, Lucas burst in, too loud, too fast, carrying a basket muzzle and a leash. I got the... Lucas began. Shadow's body snapped rigid. The change was instant, like a switch. Shadow's breathing spiked. His eyes flashed to the door, scanning like the world had become a threat again. Lucas froze, eyes wide. Oh, okay, sorry. Hayes's voice cut through sharp. Reed, outside, now. Lucas backed out like a man retreating from a bear, mouthing silent apologies. Ethan kept his voice steady, not annoyed, not panicked. It's okay, he murmured to Shadow. We're still here. Shadow's muscles trembled. A low sound started in his chest, not a growl, more like a pressure release that had nowhere else to go. Ethan withdrew his hand slowly and stepped back, giving space. Lena spoke from behind, very soft. He's in a flashback loop. He's not reacting to Lucas as a person. He's reacting to the suddenness. Hayes answered quietly. Then fix the suddenness. Ethan nodded once and looked at Lena. Can you bring Lucas back in? Slowly. Silent. Lena stepped to the doorway and gestured Lucas forward with an expression that said, Do not ruin this. Lucas reappeared at the threshold like he was entering a church, moving with exaggerated caution. His eyes stayed on Ethan's face for cues. He didn't speak. Ethan pointed subtly toward the floor, and Lucas set the leash down gently. No metal clink. He set the muzzle down, too, like placing a fragile artifact. Shadow watched, eyes still wide but not escalating. Ethan took a breath. "Good," he whispered to Lucas, barely audible. Lucas looked like he wanted to cry with relief. Ethan turned back to Shadow. "We're going to put this on you," he said, indicating the muzzle without moving toward it. "It's not punishment, it's so nobody gets hurt. Then we walk, that's all." Shadow's ears flattened slightly at the word muzzle, like he'd worn one before in a different kind of room. Ethan waited, letting the dog's nervous system catch up to language. "Shadow," Ethan said again, calm. "Look at me." Shadow's gaze flicked to Ethan's eyes. Ethan reached for the muzzle slowly, making sure his movements were visible, predictable. He brought it near the cage bars and paused, letting Shadow sniff. Shadow's nostrils flared. His body trembled, but he didn't pull back. Ethan murmured, "Good." He guided the muzzle in, inch by inch, stopping each time Shadow tensed. Waiting each time Shadow eased. It took longer than it should have. That was the point. When the muzzle finally sat in place, Shadow's breathing came in short bursts, but he didn't fight. He didn't snap. He endured. Ethan clipped it carefully. No loud snaps, no sudden tug. Hayes's voice was tight behind him. "Cole, good." Ethan nodded once without looking away from Shadow. Then he reached for the leash. The moment the leash touched Shadow's collar, the dog's whole body shivered, like the contact itself was a memory. Ethan spoke softly, almost a promise. "Not like before." Shadow's eyes closed for a fraction of a second, then opened again. Ethan unlocked the cage door. The metal creaked. Shadow didn't move. Ethan waited. He stepped back, giving the opening space. "You can come out," he said. Shadow stared at the opening like it was a trap. Hayes shifted, her boots making a slight sound. Shadow's head snapped toward her. Ethan immediately murmured, "It's okay." Hayes stopped moving entirely, understanding. Minutes passed. Lucas stood in the doorway, holding his breath like it was a job. Lena watched with eyes that missed nothing, recording silently. Ethan stayed still, steady. Finally, Shadow took one step, then another. His gait was cautious, controlled, body low like he expected punishment from the world. He cleared the cage threshold and paused, trembling. Ethan didn't pull the leash, didn't coax with excitement. He simply turned his body toward the corridor and took one step, inviting the dog to follow. Shadow hesitated, then followed. A collective exhale filled the room. They moved down the corridor with the slow precision of a bomb squad. Lucas walked ahead, silently holding doors open, moving like he'd finally learned the value of restraint. Lena stayed to Ethan's left, a calm presence, keeping her distance but tracking Shadow's breathing patterns like they were data. Hayes followed behind, authority as protection rather than pressure. Shadow's ears were up now, scanning, but he didn't yank, didn't fight. He walked as if each step had to be negotiated with the past. When they reached the service hallway, a janitor pushed a cart around the corner. The cart wheels squealed. Metal buckets clanged. Shadow's body jolted. Ethan felt it through the leash before he saw it. The dog's muscles tightened, ready to bolt. Ethan stepped between Shadow and the cart without thinking, his own body becoming a shield. He lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Shadow," he said, "stay with me." The janitor froze, eyes wide. "Oh, sorry," Hayes snapped. "Stop right there." The janitor didn't move. Ethan kept his posture angled, non-threatening, breathing slow on purpose. He let Shadow see his calm, hear it, feel it through the leash that wasn't pulling. Shadow's breathing spiked, then, after a long, painful second, slowed. The dog's gaze returned to Ethan. Ethan nodded once. "Good?" They continued. When they reached the unit training bay, the air changed. Less fluorescent buzz, more open space, rubber flooring, training obstacles stacked neatly in a corner. A familiar smell of dog and work that wasn't hopeless. Shadow paused in the doorway, nostrils flaring. Ethan could almost see the internal calculation. Is this another cage? Another test? Another failure? Ethan stepped in first and turned to face him. "This is ours," Ethan said quietly. "Safe." Shadow took one step in, then another. His tail hung low, but the frantic edge in his breathing eased. Just a little. Hayes closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting herself breathe for the first time. Lena looked at Ethan, voice soft. "He followed you." Ethan kept his eyes on Shadow. "He's been waiting for someone to not leave." Lucas, still at the threshold, finally whispered, "Okay, I'm officially emotional." Hayes shot him a look. Lucas shrugged helplessly. "It's the dog, Captain." Hayes turned away, but Ethan caught the micro-expression, her eyes shining just a fraction before she hid it behind discipline. Lena set her tablet down on a training table. "We need to document everything," she said. "Timeline, triggers, the sealed attachment, and what we saw." Hayes nodded. "We will. And we need to do it before IA arrives and decides this becomes a locked room." Lucas raised his hand again, cautious. If IA shows up, are they going to take him anyway?" Hayes's voice was firm. "They can try." Ethan glanced down at Shadow. The dog had moved to a corner of the training bay and sat with his back against the wall, positioning himself like he needed protection from every angle. But his eyes kept returning to Ethan like a tether. Ethan felt the weight of that look, not just because it was a dog, because it was a promise. Ethan crouched slowly, keeping distance. "Shadow," he murmured. Shadow's ears twitched. Ethan held his palm out, not touching, just offering. Shadow stared. Then, with visible effort, he stood and took 2 careful steps toward Ethan. He stopped short, trembling, then lowered his head and pressed the muzzle gently against Ethan's open hand. The contact was small, but in it was everything: memory, grief, fear, and the smallest seed of trust. Ethan swallowed hard. Hayes watched silently, her face unreadable. Lena's eyes softened. "He's bonding," she whispered. Lucas exhaled shakily. "I cannot believe this is the same dog they said was a monster." Hayes pushed off the door and straightened. "All right," she said, voice crisp because leadership needed structure. "Ethan, Shadow stays here under your supervision. Lucas, you're on perimeter, no one in without my authorization. Lena, I want a written report in an hour." Lucas nodded too fast. "Yes, ma'am." Lena nodded once. "Understood." Hayes looked at Ethan. "Cole," she said quietly now, the tone of someone speaking to a colleague rather than a subordinate. "Whatever this is, it's coming." Ethan met her gaze. "Then we're ready." Hayes held his eyes for a beat, then nodded and stepped out. The door closed softly. For a moment it was just Ethan, Lena, Lucas, and Shadow in the training bay. The air was still. Shadow sat again, but this time not with his head lowered into nothingness. His eyes stayed open, alert, watching Ethan like he was the only stable thing in a shifting world. Ethan lowered himself onto the rubber mat, careful not to crowd the dog. He spoke softly, more to Shadow than anyone. "You don't have to carry it alone," Ethan said. Shadow's ears twitched. Lena watched, thoughtful. "We should figure out what cue he's responding to," she said. "The keys might be linked to evidence room access, or a handler, or the night itself." Lucas rubbed his palms together nervously. "Can we not recreate the night?" Ethan's voice stayed steady. "We don't recreate anything. We listen." Shadow's gaze shifted to the corner where Lucas had set the keys earlier on the floor. Ethan followed the dog's eyes. And in that simple glance, Ethan felt the story starting to reveal itself. Not through words, through pattern, through pain, through a dog that had tried to tell the truth and got punished for it. The footsteps arrived sooner than Ethan expected. They echoed down the corridor outside the training bay, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority that didn't need to hurry because it assumed compliance. Ethan felt it before he heard the voices, the shift in the building's posture, the way the air itself seemed to tighten. Shadow felt it too. The dog's head lifted sharply, ears angling toward the door. His body stiffened, muscles coiling beneath his coat like he was bracing for impact. Ethan stayed seated on the mat, his posture unchanged. "It's okay," he said quietly. "We're still here." Shadow's eyes flicked to Ethan's face, then back to the door. His breathing sped up, not frantic yet, but alert, guarded. Lena closed her tablet softly. "They're early?" Lucas swallowed. "That's never good." The door handle turned. Captain Maria Hayes stepped in first, her presence controlled but unmistakably tense. Behind her were 2 people Ethan hadn't seen before, both in dark suits, badges clipped at their waists, internal affairs energy, clean shoes, no wasted movement. The taller one spoke first. Captain Hayes. Hayes nodded once. Agent. His gaze moved immediately to Shadow. Ethan watched the moment Shadow noticed the shift in power. The dog's shoulders hunched, tail lowering, his body angling slightly so his scarred side faced the door, as if that part of him remembered being the shield. Ethan rose slowly to his feet and positioned himself subtly between Shadow and the visitors. Not blocking, just present. "This is Officer Ethan Cole," Hayes said. "He's supervising the K-9 during reassessment." The agent's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Shadow. "That's not standard." Hayes' voice stayed level. "Neither is this situation." The second agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a tablet already in her hand, spoke. "We're here regarding the sealed attachment tied to case D917. Shadow's ears flattened at the sound of the case number. Ethan noticed immediately. He felt a chill slide down his spine. Lena noticed too. "Did you see that?" she murmured under her breath. Hayes did not miss it. "Yes," she said calmly. "We all did." The first agent frowned. "See what?" Ethan answered, before Hayes could. "The dog reacted to the case reference." The agent scoffed lightly. "Dogs don't understand case numbers." "No," Ethan said evenly, "but they understand the sounds associated with them. Voices, cadence, stress patterns." Shadow let out a low, restrained sound, not a growl, but something close, a vibration that lived deeper than threat. Ethan dropped his voice instantly. "Shadow, with me." Shadow's eyes snapped to Ethan's face. The sound died in his chest. The female agent's eyebrows lifted. "Interesting." The male agent crossed his arms. This dog was labeled unsafe for a reason. Ethan met his gaze. So was the evidence. That landed harder than Ethan intended, but he didn't take it back. The room went very quiet. Hayes broke the tension. "You're here because the sealed attachment suggests procedural mishandling connected to the K-9's behavior. We halted the transfer under my authority, pending reassessment." The male agent's jaw tightened. "You overstepped." Hayes didn't blink. "I exercised discretion." The female agent looked from Hayes to Ethan to Shadow. "Let's talk facts," she said. "Dr. Moore?" Lena straightened, grounding herself. "The attachment references an alert anomaly during the fallen officer's final operation. Shadow's response was dismissed. Afterward, Shadow's behavior deteriorated, but only in environments that mirror procedural stressors tied to that night." The male agent waved a hand. "Correlation is not causation." Ethan said quietly, "Trauma isn't random." Shadow's breathing spiked again at the tone of dismissal. Ethan felt it immediately through the leash. He knelt, placing his body lower than Shadow's line of sight, keeping his voice calm. "Shadow," he murmured. "Easy." Shadow's eyes flicked to him. The trembling eased. The female agent watched closely. "He regulates with you." Ethan nodded once. "He's responding to predictability." The female agent hesitated. "Then what are you proposing?" Ethan took a breath. "Time, space, and someone willing to listen." The male agent laughed without humor. "That's not a proposal. That's a sentiment." Lena stepped forward, eyes steady. "Then let me make it procedural. We conduct a non-invasive behavioral audit. No reenactments, no forced cues. We observe naturally occurring responses while reviewing archived audio from the case, without Shadow present." The female agent considered. "And the dog?" Ethan answered. "He stays here, with me." Hayes nodded. "Under my authorization." The male agent looked at the female agent. "We can't allow—" She raised a finger. "We can allow a temporary hold while we verify whether the sealed attachment warrants reopening the case." The male agent's jaw tightened. "You're gambling." She met his stare. "So was the original report." She turned to Ethan. "If this dog is a witness, Officer Cole, then you're his handler." Ethan nodded. "I know." She held his gaze for a long second, then looked at Hayes. "We'll reopen the attachment under review, quietly. If this turns out to be nothing—" Hayes finished for her. "Then Shadow's transfer proceeds." Ethan felt Shadow tense again. He knelt immediately. "Shadow," he whispered, "stay with me." Shadow's eyes locked on his. The female agent nodded once. "You have 48 hours." Hayes didn't argue. "That's enough." The agents turned to leave. At the door, the male agent paused and looked back at Shadow. "If he bites someone again—" Ethan's voice cut through the room, calm but ironed flat. "He won't." The agent smirked. "You sure about that?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." The door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Lucas finally let out a shaky breath. "I think my heart just tried to escape my body." Hayes rubbed her temples briefly, then straightened. 48 hours, she said. "That's all we bought." Lena looked at Shadow. "Then we don't waste a minute." Shadow sank down onto the mat, body still tense but no longer vibrating like a live wire. He pressed his shoulder against Ethan's leg, a quiet, instinctive move. Ethan felt it like a vow. Hayes noticed. Her voice softened just a fraction. "He chose you." Ethan looked down at the dog. "I think he's been waiting." Night settled over the courthouse in layers. First came the quiet, the kind that softened footsteps and made voices carry farther than intended. Then the building's after-hours rhythm took over, cleaning crews moving like ghosts, the distant whir of elevators, the occasional radio squawk bleeding through concrete walls. In the training bay, the lights were dimmed to a warmer hue. Ethan had insisted. Fluorescent glare made Shadow restless. Warm light made the room feel less like a test chamber and more like a place that could belong to someone. Shadow lay on his side now, not fully relaxed, but no longer coiled like a spring. His breathing was slow, uneven in places, as if he still didn't trust sleep to be safe. Ethan sat on the mat a few feet away, back against the padded wall, boots unlaced. He didn't crowd, he didn't stare. He let the silence do some of the work. Dr. Lena Moore sat cross-legged at a table with her laptop and tablet, headphones resting around her neck like a promise she hadn't made yet. Multiple timelines glowed on her screen, radio chatter transcripts, timestamps, case numbers. Captain Maria Hayes stood near the doorway, arms folded, posture that said, "I'm here even if I'm not speaking." Deputy Lucas Reed paced until Hayes gave him a look. He stopped pacing. "Okay," Lucas whispered, like volume itself could break something. "So, what are we listening for?" Lena answered without looking up. "Patterns, disruptions, anything that matches Shadow's physiological responses." Lucas frowned. "Physio what now?" Ethan spoke quietly. "Breathing changes, ear position, muscle tension." Lucas nodded slowly. "Right, dog stuff." Shadow's ears flicked at the sound of Ethan's voice, then settled again. Lena tapped a key and leaned back slightly. "I'm starting with radio traffic from the last 10 minutes before the ambush." Hayes's jaw tightened. "That's where the report gets vague." Lena nodded. "That's where truth usually hides." She hit play. Static filled the room, soft at first, then layered with clipped voices. Officers calling positions, code words, a cadence that spoke of routine, not danger. Shadow's ears lifted. Ethan felt it immediately. The leash, slack on the floor, twitched just enough to register. He didn't move. He watched. Shadow's head lifted slightly. His breathing deepened, not faster, heavier. Lena's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to the screen. "Noted," she murmured, typing. The radio voice shifted. Another officer cutting in, tone sharper. Shadow's ears angled forward. Ethan felt his own chest tighten, the echo of 100 nights on patrol when routine turned to chaos without warning. Then came a sound, brief, metallic, the click of something handled roughly near a microphone. Shadow flinched. His body stiffened, muscles locking as if the floor had turned to ice. Ethan spoke immediately, voice low and steady. "Shadow, you're here." Shadow's eyes flicked to him. The stiffness eased by a fraction. Lena paused the audio. "That click," she said. "Did you see that reaction?" Hayes nodded slowly. "Yes," Lucas swallowed. "That was intense." Lena rewound 10 seconds and played it again. Shadow reacted again. Same moment, same tension. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That sound means something." Lena leaned forward. "That's not standard radio noise." She isolated the audio track, fingers flying. "There," she said. "It's not a firearm, not a door. It's keys." Lucas blinked. "Keys?" Lena nodded. Metal on metal, likely someone accessing a secure locker or evidence cabinet. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Evidence room access logs are missing from that window. Ethan felt a cold line settle down his spine. Shadow shifted on the mat, turning his head away from the speakers as if he wanted the sound to stop. His breathing quickened, shallow now. Ethan moved closer, not touching, just nearer. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're not there." Shadow's ears flicked back toward Ethan. Lena muted the audio. "We don't need to push him." Hayes nodded. "Agreed." The room held its breath for a moment. Shadow's breathing slowed again, though his eyes stayed open, watchful. Lena scrolled through her timeline. If Shadow reacted to keys in the evidence room, and that alert was dismissed, then something was being moved, Hayes finished, or shouldn't have been. Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper. "And the dog knew." Ethan looked at Shadow. "He didn't panic," he said. "He warned." Shadow's tail gave a single tentative thump against the mat. Not excitement, acknowledgement. Lena's fingers stilled. "Got it." Hayes stepped closer. "What did you find?" Lena turned the screen toward them. "There's a 37-second gap in hallway camera footage adjacent to the evidence room during that time window." Lucas's mouth fell open. "That's not a glitch." Hayes's expression hardened. "No, that's a decision." Shadow let out a low, quiet sound, almost a sigh. Ethan knelt fully now, resting on his heels. He spoke softly to the dog. "You tried to tell them." Shadow's eyes met his. Something in them eased. Hayes looked at Ethan. "If this holds, Iowa won't be able to bury it." Ethan nodded. "They'll try." Hayes's mouth tightened. "Then we make it too loud." Lena glanced at the door. "They gave us 48 hours. Once this goes upstairs, they'll shut us down," Hayes finished, "unless we force their hand." Lucas raised a finger cautiously. How does one force the hand of internal affairs?" Hayes looked at Ethan. Ethan felt the weight of it land squarely on his shoulders. "We document everything," Ethan said. "Every reaction, every timestamp, and we tie it to policy." Lena nodded. "If Shadow's alert aligns with evidence mishandling, then labeling him unsafe becomes retaliation." Hayes exhaled slowly. "And retaliation is indefensible." Shadow shifted closer to Ethan, his shoulder brushing Ethan's knee. Ethan didn't pull away. He rested his hand on the mat beside Shadow, close enough that the dog could choose contact. After a moment, Shadow leaned in, placing his weight gently against Ethan's leg. Not desperate, trusting. The training bay door creaked open slightly as a janitor passed, peeking in, then quietly moving on. Shadow didn't react. Ethan noticed immediately. He looked down at the dog. "You're learning." Shadow's ears twitched, but he stayed pressed against Ethan's leg. Lena saved her files and closed the laptop with finality. "We have enough to justify a formal reopen." Hayes nodded. "Then we do it before morning." Lucas glanced at the clock. "It's already past midnight." Hayes met his gaze. "Then we're ahead of schedule." Ethan stayed where he was, one hand resting lightly against Shadow's shoulder now. The fur was warm beneath his palm, the muscle solid, alive. Shadow's eyes finally closed, just a crack. Sleep didn't come all at once, but it came. Ethan stayed still, letting the dog settle. Outside, paperwork would be drafted, phones would ring, lines would be crossed. Inside the training bay, a retired police dog, once written off, nearly erased, rested beside a man who had decided he wouldn't look away. And in that quiet space, something irreversible had already happened. Shadow had been believed. Dawn didn't arrive all at once. It seeped into the courthouse through high windows and narrow corridors, turning the night's sharp edges soft and gray. The building woke slowly, lights flicking on in distant offices, doors opening with familiar creaks, the smell of stale coffee giving way to something fresher. In the training bay, Ethan hadn't moved. He sat where he'd been for hours, back against the padded wall, one knee bent, the other stretched out. Shadow lay pressed against his leg, asleep now, real sleep, not the half-alert doze of an animal waiting for something bad to happen. Ethan could feel the dog's breath through his pants. Slow, uneven in places, but steady. It was the steadiest Shadow had looked since Ethan met him. Ethan hadn't slept. He didn't need to. He watched the rise and fall of Shadow's ribs like it was proof of something fragile and necessary. The door opened quietly. Captain Maria Hayes stepped in, carrying 2 paper cups. She paused when she saw them, her expression shifting from command-ready to something gentler. She crossed the room and set 1 cup down near Ethan without a word. Ethan glanced up. "Thanks?" Hayes nodded. "You should eat something too." Ethan smiled faintly. "One miracle at a time." Hayes leaned against the training table, careful not to disturb Shadow. IA called at 6. Ethan's eyes sharpened. And? They want a formal presentation today. Noon? Ethan exhaled slowly. That's fast. They realize we weren't bluffing. Shadow stirred at the change in Ethan's breathing, ears twitching. Ethan immediately softened. Easy? Shadow settled again, pressing closer. Hayes watched it happen. He anchors to you. Ethan didn't look away from the dog. He's tired of floating. Hayes took a sip of coffee. They're sending a panel. Legal, behavioral, command. Ethan nodded. Then we need Lena. She's already pulling case law, Hayes said. Guardian handling, misclassification precedents, retaliation findings. Ethan glanced at her. You're committing to this. Hayes met his eyes. I already did. The door opened again, louder this time. Deputy Lucas Reed walked in carrying a paper bag and a grin he was failing to suppress. I brought breakfast, he whispered, then froze when he saw Shadow sleeping. Oh, wow. He lowered his voice further. He's actually asleep. Ethan nodded. First real rest he's had in a while. Lucas crouched instinctively, then caught Hayes's look and froze mid-bend. Sorry, he mouthed. Hayes waved him in, quietly. Lucas set the bag down and leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on Shadow like he was watching a miracle that might evaporate if he breathed wrong. This dog, Lucas whispered, was supposed to be gone by yesterday. Ethan said softly, so were a lot of truths. Lena entered moments later, hair pulled back hastily, eyes sharp despite the early hour. She stopped when she saw Shadow and Ethan together. Her voice dropped automatically. He slept? Ethan nodded. All night. Lena's shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. She set her laptop on the table and turned to Hayes. I have enough to argue misclassification and enough to suggest procedural pressure. Hayes nodded. Then we present. Lucas raised a hand halfway. Can I just say, I'm glad this didn't end with me explaining to my mom why a police dog bit me. Ethan smirked faintly. Shadow's eyes opened slowly. For a moment, he looked disoriented. Then his gaze landed on Ethan, and his body relaxed again. Ethan spoke quietly. Morning. Shadow's tail thumped once against the mat. Lucas pressed his lips together, eyes shining. He wagged. Hayes glanced at the clock. All right, we have 3 hours. Lena turned to Ethan. I'll need you there. Ethan nodded. I'll be there. Shadow's ears lifted at the word there. Ethan looked down at him. Not far, he said. We'll be back. Shadow watched him closely, tension creeping back into his shoulders. Ethan felt it immediately. He placed his hand gently on Shadow's shoulder. You stay here. Captain Hayes will be here. Lucas, too. Shadow's gaze flicked to Hayes, then to Lucas. Lucas swallowed. Hi, buddy. It's me. I promise not to drop anything. Shadow snorted softly. It almost sounded like humor. Hayes straightened. Let's move. The conference room on the 3rd floor felt colder than the training bay ever had. Long table, hard chairs, bottled water lined up like props. The kind of room where decisions were made that affected lives without ever seeing them. Ethan sat at one end, Lena beside him, Hayes across the table. The panel filtered in, faces composed, eyes already skeptical. The male IA agent from the night before took a seat near the center. The female agent sat beside him, tablet ready. Let's begin, the chair said. Captain Hayes, you halted a lawful transfer. Hayes nodded. I did. On what grounds? Hayes gestured toward Ethan and Lena. Misclassification, based on incomplete reporting and newly surfaced evidence. The male agent scoffed. A dog's reaction is not evidence. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Behavior is data. The chair frowned. Officer? Cole, Ethan said calmly, and I'm Shadow's supervising handler. The panel exchanged glances. Lena stood projecting calm authority. We'll start with the timeline. She walked them through it. Radio logs, missing timestamps, camera gaps, audio cues. When she played the isolated sound, the faint metallic click, several panel members leaned forward. That sound, Lena said, triggered a consistent physiological response in K9 Shadow, not aggression, recognition. The male agent crossed his arms. You're anthropomorphizing. Ethan met his gaze. I'm interpreting. The chair raised a hand. Officer Cole, what do you believe the dog was reacting to? Ethan didn't hesitate. Evidence movement during the fallen officer's final operation? A murmur rippled through the room. The female agent spoke. "We confirmed a camera gap." Silence followed. Hayes added, "And we confirmed the evaluation team never included Shadow's original handlers." The chair leaned back slowly. "If this is accurate," Lena finished quietly, then labeling the dog unsafe, removed a witness. The room went very still. The male agent opened his mouth, then closed it again. The chair nodded once. "We'll recess." Ethan returned to the training bay like he was walking back into sunlight. Shadow lifted his head immediately. Ethan crouched. "I'm back." Shadow rose and pressed into him, muzzle against his chest, breath warm and shaky. Ethan wrapped an arm around the dog's neck, not restraining, just present. Lucas watched from the doorway, wiping at his eyes with the heel of his hand. Hayes entered behind Ethan. "They're reopening the case?" Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Hayes continued, "And Shadow's transfer is canceled." Shadow barked once, low, soft, uncertain. Ethan laughed quietly, breath hitching. "Yeah," he whispered. "You did good." Lena smiled, relief finally breaking through her composure. "He did." Hayes straightened. "Shadow will remain under supervised rehabilitation." Ethan nodded. "With me." Hayes met his eyes. "With you." Shadow leaned harder into Ethan, like he'd heard and understood everything. Outside the bay, the courthouse moved on. Inside, a partnership that should never have been broken took its first real breath. The training bay felt different after the decision. Nothing had physically changed. The same rubber flooring, the same stacked hurdles, the same faint smell of disinfectant and dog, but the air itself had loosened. The pressure that had lived in the corners was gone, replaced by something cautious and new. Hope. Shadow stayed close to Ethan, not glued in fear, but aligned, walking when Ethan walked, stopping when he stopped. His limp was still there, a subtle hitch in his gait, but he carried it with less tension, as if the pain no longer defined his next move. Captain Maria Hayes stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching them with the quiet satisfaction of a leader who knew she'd made the right call. "This isn't the end," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know." "Reopened cases don't like being reopened," Hayes added. "People push back." Ethan rested a hand briefly on Shadow's shoulder. "So do dogs." Shadow's ears twitched, as if he approved. Dr. Lena Moore packed up her laptop, her movements precise but lighter now. "I'll be tied to this for a while," she said. "Behavioral reports, evidence review, expert testimony if it comes to that." Ethan met her eyes. "I'm glad you're on it." Lena smiled faintly. "So is Shadow." Deputy Lucas Reed lingered by the training obstacles, pretending to adjust a cone while very obviously watching the dog. "So," Lucas said, clearing his throat, "hypothetically speaking, does this mean Shadow is, like, part of our unit now?" Hayes answered before Ethan could. "Supervised rehabilitation placement." Lucas nodded vigorously. "Right, that, which is definitely not the same as part of the family, but also kind of is." Shadow glanced at Lucas, then looked back at Ethan. Ethan smirked. "He's selective." Lucas placed a hand over his heart. "Fair." Hayes checked her watch. "I have a call with Command in 10. They'll want assurances." Ethan straightened. "They'll get results." Hayes held his gaze. "I knew you'd say that." She paused, then added quietly, "Daniel would have trusted you." Ethan felt the weight of the name settle, heavy but no longer crushing. "I know," he said. Hayes turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. The room grew quiet again. Ethan knelt and unclipped Shadow's muzzle, moving slowly, narrating each motion the way Lena had taught him. "All right," he said softly. "This comes off." Shadow tensed for a moment, then relaxed as the strap loosened. When the muzzle came free, Shadow didn't bolt. He simply sat there, blinking, as if unsure what freedom looked like without conditions attached. Ethan placed the muzzle on the floor, well away, and held still. Shadow leaned forward and pressed his forehead lightly against Ethan's chest. The contact wasn't desperate. It was deliberate. Ethan wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck, careful of the scar, letting the dog set the pressure. Shadow sighed, a long, steady breath that sounded like something leaving him at last. Lucas turned away, pretending very hard to examine the far wall. Lena watched with a scientist's eye and a human's heart. "That," she said softly, "is release." Ethan stayed there with Shadow for a long moment. not speaking, not moving. He didn't need to. When he finally rose, Shadow rose with him. "Let's walk," Ethan said. They moved through the unit corridors at an unhurried pace. Officers glanced over, some curious, some wary, some already softened by rumor. Shadow didn't react to them. He reacted to Ethan. They reached the exit doors that opened onto the morning air. Ethan paused, hand on the push bar. "You ready?" Shadow's ears lifted. His nose twitched, catching scents beyond concrete and paperwork, grass, oil, wind. He stepped forward without hesitation. The doors swung open, and sunlight spilled across the threshold. Shadow stopped just long enough to blink against the brightness, then stepped out, his shadow stretching long on the pavement beside Ethan's. No cage, no muzzle, no countdown, just open air and a future that wasn't sealed in a file. Ethan looked down at him. "We'll take it slow." Shadow's tail wagged once. Then again, Ethan laughed quietly. "Yeah, me too." They walked across the lot together, side by side, the retired K-9 who had nearly been erased, and the officer who had refused to let that happen. Behind them, inside the courthouse, doors would close, meetings would start, and uncomfortable truths would move upward. But out here, in the clean morning light, one truth already stood firm. Shadow had been loyal to the end, and someone had finally been loyal back.